Hello and welcome to the Warioware Get It Together tier list. This is going to be the most ultimate tier list here on YouTube because I have been playing this game absolutely non-stop, and frankly, I think my opinions are the most valid and everyone else's
is not.
But before we truly begin, I want to make it clear that just because I find a character bad, it doesn't really mean anything. The entire point of Warioware is that you're supposed to quickly think on your toes and figure everything out, and I find that a lot of fun. The fact that there are quote-unquote bad characters just kind of adds to the fun to me. And with that out of the way, let's go ahead and describe the tiers. The first tier, subscribe to the Stoner 32. These are the cream of the creme of the creme, whatever. They're the best characters in the game because they're subscribed to me. Make sure to subscribe and hit that like. Next up, Solid AF. These characters are just solid. There's nothing really too wrong with them. There's nothing too bad about them, but you know, they just don't reach the higher echelons. They just haven't hit that subscribe button. Next tier we got is B. B, you know what it means. We all know what B is in the tier list. We gotta have it. The next tier is unfortunate. These characters are just a little bit unfortunate, you know? Like, most of the time when you get them, it's a struggle to deal with them. And, you know, it's a shame. But, you know, they're still playable. They're not the absolute worst. Because the absolute worst is a big yikes. That's a big yikes. Big yikes. So, let's just go ahead and start this. Let's get in order. First up, Wario. Wario is a flyer who's able to dash, and that's really it. He can just fly anywhere, and he can dash to the left and right. The dash is decently strong, and it gives him like a good boost in speed, which is useful if you mess up and you need to like quickly go to like the other side of the screen. He's able to pretty much cover the entire screen with only like 2 dashes. And he's a pretty solid character. Pretty much any flyer in the game is just able to do most micro games. It's not a challenge for him. The main problem is that if he needs to like do damage or anything like that, he needs to get kind of close, and that's a bit of a problem, especially in higher speeds where you might like just lose control just a little bit. But Wario is a solid AF character. Next up, Young Cricket. Young Cricket controls like a platformer. He's grounded and he needs to jump up to do literally anything. He's pretty fast and he's a tad floaty because they need him to go a little fast to keep up with the micro games. So there are some instances where he's a little difficult because like he has to come down, so dial games can be a little sussy. His head doesn't always make sense with like the angles it sends stuff. I personally think Young Cricket hovers between solid AF and B tier. I'm not entirely sure where I would want to put him, but I think just because he's grounded and he needs to like jump up to do anything up in the top, I think that gives him a B tier, because around fast speeds, he's really fast, and he can get a little bit strange to control. Next up, 18Volt. 18Volt is completely unable to move, but he's able to send a projectile pretty much anywhere around him. Whenever a micro game needs him to use his projectile to break something or get something or anything, he is fantastic. He's a great character. But it starts to get a little weird when he needs to move. If you're not aware, if a character who has limited mobility needs to like jump or move, they put these little rings in the minigame, and it's just a little strange sometimes where they put them. He needs to use the rings, but you need to aim at the rings, and the rings have like a surprisingly small hitbox, so it can be a little difficult, and especially in faster speeds. And there are some minigames that need quick reflexes, and 18Volt just doesn't move that quickly. He does move quickly, don't get me wrong, but like you need to think where you need to aim, you need to actually aim there, and then you need to aim at the right time. It's a little strange. 18Volt can be pretty difficult, and that's why I'm putting him in the B tier. I think he's a little bit better than Cricket, because when a micro game can be defeated with 18Volt's projectiles, it's like incredibly easy. It's just that his movement really just kind of hampers the character, in my opinion. And just like Cricket, I think 18Volt can kind of be like low solid AF, but I think the movement is just really bad because there are a couple minigames where it's just terrible to be 18Volt. Next up we got is my girl Mona. Mona Pizza herself. Mona Pizza is a flyer, but she's unable to stop moving, so you have to constantly direct her. And she can throw a boomerang where she stops moving, and the boomerang pretty much takes over the way you control Mona. Mona is a pretty solid character because she's able to fly, and flying is just a good trait to have in this game. The main problem is that she doesn't stop moving. Even if you throw her boomerang, the boomerang has to keep moving. So you need to make sure that boomerang doesn't hit anything. The only real way to stop Mona is to just have her hit a wall over and over, and that's not always available. And that doesn't seem like a big problem, but like in faster speeds, she just starts to get a little difficult to control. And it's just a bit of a shame because she's really cute and she's a lot of fun, but like, she's just a little unfortunate in my eyes. If you want a high score, you're gonna want a little bit more control, and Mona just doesn't give that to you. Next up, Dribble and Spits. Dribble and Spits are a category of flies who are able to shoot out projectiles, but only in one specific direction. Dribble is player 1 and is able to shoot to the right, and Spits is player 2 and able to shoot to the left. There's not too much to say about them. Their projectiles shoot out fast, and they're just a flyer really. The main problem with this category of flyers is the exact same within pretty much all of them, is that if the microgame doesn't allow them to shoot in the correct way, they have to use their body. And it can be a little awkward, but it's not difficult, really. It's not a pain. So they are a solid AF character. It's just a shame you just can't play as Spits if you're one player. Spits is cool. Up next is Dr. Krygor. Krygor is completely unable to move until you hold down A, in which he's able to swim around the screen. It's sort of like flying, but he can only move when you're holding down A. He has a constant hitbox around his head, and which is very useful in a lot of microgames. The main problem with Dr. Krygor is he's a little floaty and kind of hard to maneuver, especially in high speeds, which is definitely a problem. There's really not too much to say. He's pretty much like a flyer, but like bad. There is something unique to Dr. Krygor, and that is he's actually able to swim. There are a couple microgames that are underwater, and it slows down pretty much all the characters except Dr. Krygor because he's actually swimming. And you know, there's not a lot of microgames that really do that, but it is a niche carved out by him. I don't think it really helps him too much though. I do think he's a little bit unfortunate. Gonna be quite honest here. And he's probably better than Mona because he's actually able to stop. Up next, Ninevolt. Honestly, I don't really think I need to beat around the bush with this. Ninevolt is just a big yikes for me. Ninevolt is constantly skating on the ground back and forth, and the only way to stop is to push A, which shoots out a yo-yo straight above him. This is a problem. First of all, because he's constantly moving, you have a limited amount of time with a lot of microgames to properly finish them because you can't aim properly. And imagine aiming him at high speeds. It's impossible. It is actually a nightmare. There's absolutely no doubts. Ninevolt is just a bad character. You just nothing more to say. He's just bad. Up next is Mike. Mike is another category of flyer that can only shoot in one direction, and that is up. And shooting up is incredibly useful. Most microgames are able to be defeated by Mike easily because shooting up is just useful. He's just a solid AF character. He has very similar problems with Dribble and Spits, but I think shooting up is just a much better mechanic, and I think he goes on the very top of solid AF right now. Next up, Kat and Anna. Kat and Anna are unable to stop jumping, but they are able to shoot out a projectile. Kat shoots to the right, Anna to the left, player 1, player 2, you know the deal. And it's a similar problem in Ninevolt, where it becomes difficult to control them sometimes. Because they never stop jumping, there's a limited amount of time to defeat certain microgames. Not only that, you might need to like move yourself because the arc of their jump, just like cricket, is a hitbox. So if something hits the top of their head, they're gonna activate it, destroy it, hit it, whether you want to or not. It can be a little difficult to control them, and that's why they're also big yikes. But they are definitely better than Ninevolt because you have more control over them. Up next is Jimmy T. Jimmy T is a weird one. He dashes in the direction you're pointing the joystick at. And it's useful, it's fast, it's decently strong. The problem is, it's hard to control at fast speeds, and you can't really make good nuanced movements with him. He's very similar to Dr. Krygor, but honestly I think he's a lot worse. Just because you can't really control him easily. So I do think he's a little unfortunate. Dr. Krygor is better because you have a little bit more control over him. Because Jimmy, you pretty much need to go the full length of his dash. You just need to do a lot of weird stuff in order to go in like a specific area sometimes. Next up is Ashley. Ashley is a flyer who's able to shoot at any direction she's pointing. And that's just like one of the best abilities to ask for in this game. She's able to take out enemies at a long distance. She's able to collect stuff at a long distance if you're running out of time. She just flies anywhere you need her to be. She's just a super really good character, and she is subscribed to me. Up next is Orbulon. Orbulon is a flyer who has a tractor beam that is able to just pick up objects. And if you're familiar with this game, that is a very, very strong ability. He can just make some microgames completely obsolete. The main problem is, his hitbox only goes downwards, and sometimes it can be a little awkward because like some characters can just like use their body to collect stuff, but Orbulon has to use a tractor beam, so it can trip you up sometimes. However, Orbulon is just really, really good. He has a hitbox that just sticks around. Being able to just pick up objects is so useful, and he is subscribed to Destona32. And honestly, I think these two are kind of interchangeable. I think it's just personal preference, whether you like the ability to shoot anywhere as Ashley or the tractor beam as Orbulon. A lot of people say Orbulon's the best. I personally like Ashley a lot more because Orbulon can be a little funky sometimes. And Ashley is usually just generically good. But micro games where Orbulon is better than Ashley, Orbulon is much better than Ashley. Up next, Ninevolt. Ninevolt is completely immobile on the ground. However, she's able to just warp anywhere she wants. However, you have to be careful where you warp because the moment she warps, she has to fall down to the ground before she's able to warp again. And I don't have to be the first one to tell you that warping anywhere you want is a strong ability. It's a very strong ability. It makes so many microgames completely invalid. However, there are some microgames where you need to be a little bit tricky with her. Dial microgames can be a little weird, and there are a couple microgames, just like a handful of microgames, where she's just god-awful. She's just the worst. However, she's able to just warp anywhere she wants, and that's just super, super strong. You cannot deny that is a strong ability. So, she has the highest highs, but probably the lowest lows as well. And with that, I think she deserves to be in the B tier, and I think right behind Young Cricket and 18Vault seems about right. And next up is Red. He's the last of the flyers that is only able to shoot in one direction, and his is down. However, he's a little bit different, because with the other flyers they're able to spam super quickly. Red can only send one bomb at a time. You are able to spam it if you're like on the ground. He's a lot slower. The projectile's a lot slower. However, to make up for it, his bomb does have splash damage, which can be useful, but sometimes when you need precision, he can just accidentally drop a bomb and whoops! However, because he is a flyer and he does have his projectile, he is still solid AF. He's just easily the worst flyer with a projectile. Up next is Master Mantis. He controls very similar to Young Cricket. He's pretty much just Young Cricket too. However, he's able to jump on the ceiling. Just on paper, Young Cricket with one extra ability, that sounds good. However, it's more of a nuisance than anything. Sometimes you'll just find yourself on the ceiling and then you have to like, oh god, I'm on the ceiling, I need to fix myself. And that might not sound like a bad thing, but in a micro game that takes up like, what, 5 seconds? That can easily just completely make you lose the game because you don't have enough time to react, you being on the ceiling all of a sudden. However, he still controls like Young Cricket, so with that, I think he's just right behind Young Cricket. It's not too difficult to deal with the ceiling shenanigans, but it can make certain microgames just not feel as good to complete with Master Mantis than Young Cricket. Up next is Lulu. This plucky Luxville kid sucks. Lulu is able to float up and ground pound. She has 2 abilities, so she can be very useful. She's able to hit up with her head and down with the ground pound. The problem is, she's so slow. She's slow and floaty. It takes her a while to fly up on the screen. Her walk speed is actually horrendous, so you pretty much have to use her jump horizontally, which does have good horizontal reach, but it takes so long to get, like, high. However, her ground pound is super fast. You're able to cancel it, so you don't have to go all the way to the ground. That does make her pretty useful, but she still feels slow and somewhat clunky. She's like the only character I don't really like to play. And with that, I'm gonna put her in unfortunate, because she's able to clear a lot of micro games. You just gotta get used to how clunky she feels. She also sucks. No one likes Lulu. If you like Lulu, don't talk to me. Up next is Penny. I will outright say this. I am very biased. I love Penny. I think she's the most fun character in the game. I just adore her. I adore her in every way. But I will try to be as objective as possible. Penny has this water gun where she shoots where you're pointing, and she's able to move in the opposite direction. However, if you don't want her to move, you can push A, and she'll hover in place while you're shooting. This is probably one of the most complicated and difficult mechanics in the game to learn. You soon find out she's really good at micro games where if you have to shoot at something over and over, she's able to send constant projectiles to just destroy it in a second. In high speeds, her movement can be so insanely difficult. You pretty much have to put little taps on the joystick so that way she doesn't go flying. And another thing, she is terrible at micro games that needs precision shooting. Because of the way her projectiles work, it sends at least 2 projectiles that could pretty much hit anything. If you're on the penny ground and you heard or balance, you know to be scared and be procedural with your shooting, because otherwise you will lose. And because of all that, she's a little difficult to properly put in the tier list. But in my opinion, because the learning curve is so high, and it is generally difficult in high speeds, I don't feel super comfortable putting her any higher than B tier. But I do think she is better than all of these characters in B tier. Oh, 18-volt move. 18. Look, there we go. I do think Penny is a lot better than all these B tier characters, but because of how difficult she is, I don't think she can be any higher. But I do think a good Penny player is better than a bad Ashley player. Up next is Fiora. He's the cutest character in the game. With that, he just gets subscribed to Distone at 32. Just kidding, big yikes. Fiora is stuck on the ground and they're able to send out their tongue at a diagonal angle. His tongue can be incredibly difficult to aim if you're not familiar with the angles. I personally haven't played any of the Fiora side games for more than 5 minutes, so I'm very unfamiliar with his tongue. It's also able to ricochet off of walls, which sometimes you need to do, and it just gets a little complicated, especially in a micro game where you might only have 5 seconds to properly do the game. So I don't have time to pull out my protractor. Fiora, where he goes in Big Yikes, it's definitely higher than Ninevolt, but I don't know if he's better than Kat and Anna, just because he also has those rings if he needs to jump, and it just, sometimes they just put him in weird places, so you need to go out of your way to go off to the side. Fiora goes behind Kat and Anna. It's more frustrating to deal with them. And this is the ultimate Warioware tier list. I will not be taking any questions. Subscribe and like.